Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Ryan with RNG Products. And if you like to make things with your hands, you're gonna wanna subscribe to my channel if you're not already subscribed. And for those of you that do support the channel, as always, if you smash that like button, that really helps me keep creating content and bringing it to you guys. Now, over the last few weeks, I've been really busy working on some projects for some clients, so I made sure to film most of that. And for today's video, I'm gonna take you on my journey of making some cutting boards out of some nice exotic hardwoods. And like everything I do, I had to make it a little extra difficult on myself. If you've always wanted to make a cutting board but didn't really know where to begin, I hope you'll gain some knowledge from this video. They make excellent gifts around the holidays, and I can hardly keep any in my house as all my family members and friends keep trying to take them from me. All right, guys, enough of me babbling. Let's make it. For this project, I'm gonna dive right into my scrap bin and start grabbing some of these hardwoods. As you can see, I've got some curly maple, purple heart, yellow heart, black walnut. I believe I have some Padauk and some Sapele in there as well. Now, I wanted my finished cutting boards to be about 1.25 inches thick, so I went ahead and set the fence up a little oversized. That way I'm going to have room to run it through the planer, remove that excess material, get everything nice and flat, and still have the finished size that I like. As you can see right here, this is a pretty thick piece of curly maple, and that wood is notorious for burning really easy. I tried to run it through with one pass, and that burned the wood really bad, so I went ahead and dropped the saw blade down, ran it through, and then flipped it over parallel, ran it back through one more time to finish that cutoff, and this helped calm down that wood burn. Since this method was so effective, I went ahead and continued that trend on the Sapele as well. Once I had all my scrap pieces ripped down, I went ahead and spent a little bit of time trying to come up with some different configurations, and here's what I finally came up with. And as you can see here, I really like to use this roll of butcher type paper. You can pick this up at your local big box stores. This will keep my work table from having all the squeeze out from the glue drying to that table and causing me a lot of cleanup later. My choice of glue for this project will be Titebond 3, as it is waterproof and food safe. Not much to explain here, just put a good amount of glue on, make sure you got all the surface area covered, line them up and clamp them down. Another thing that I would highly recommend, take your time now and clean off the excess glue. It will save you a lot of work once the boards have dried. And as the old saying goes, you can never have too many clamps. Holds very true when you start doing multiple glue ups like this. My preferred choice of clamp are these cheap and inexpensive pipe clamps. I think they do a fantastic job keeping everything aligned and nice and tight. However, when you do get desperate and run out of those nice pipe clamps, you are forced to use some of the alternative clamps you have laying around your shop. These you can pick up from Harbor Freight. They have an aluminum frame, and we all know that once you start cranking down really hard on these, they tend to bend. The two bottom ones I went ahead and modified and slipped a piece of pine down there to strengthen them, and it works pretty well. Can't say the same thing for those F clamps right there, as you saw them bend heavily once I put a little extra pressure on them. I personally like to let my glue up sit overnight before unclamping. And even with all the glue cleanup I did while clamping, as you can see, I still had quite a bit to scrape off of the bottom side. Now, I typically don't like to run a lot of glue through my planer. However, my blades were shot, so I decided to run a few rough passes through to clean up the excess glue. Then I changed the blades out. Remember, we're working with hardwood, which is very dense and hard, hence the name hardwood. So you want to take really light passes on your planer. I let the planer do the majority of the work, then I moved on to one of the new additions in my shop, and this is the Supermax 1932 drum sander, and it's been an absolute beast. Now keep in mind, this drum sander does not work like a planer. You'll want to do most of your thicknessing on the planer, then move over to the drum sander, which is going to help you with that finish sanding. I have an 80 grit wheel on here right now, and you want to take very light passes on it. This will allow the drum sander to work as it should. If you're taking too heavy of passes or being too aggressive, that's when you'll see your workpiece stall out and get that burn on the wood. A lot of people complain about that. So as long as you use the machine as it's intended, you should have no issues, and I've been very pleased with mine. So since I like to make everything I do difficult, here's where I veered off course and decided to turn this into a much larger project. I just wasn't digging the original layout, so I decided to rip all these cutting boards down and make some in-grain, crazy pattern cutting boards. After finishing ripping the cutting boards down, I realized I needed some variety. This led me back to the scrap bin and back to another glue up. Off camera, I went ahead and ripped up my last glue up, and now as you can see, I got a couple different patterns to work with, and I'm really liking the way this is coming together now. Making a few final adjustments, and time for yet another glue up. When making an in-grain pattern like this, I really like to utilize a lot of glue to make sure I get a really strong joint and glue up. Now keep in mind, these are no longer a face grain cutting board, rather a in-grain cutting board. It's been covered on the million other cutting board videos. You're not really supposed to run an in-grain cutting board through a thickness planer. However, you can, but I'm not going to dive deep into that on this video. Just make sure you clean all that excess glue and have a nice glue up, and I just plan to make some extra passes on my drum sander. And right back to the drum sander we go, and I can't say this enough times. You're already working with hardwood, and we're doing an in-grain cutting board. So that's gonna really put your sander to the test, and just take your time and take really light passes. With all the rough sanding taken care of, we can now move back over to the workbench where I'm just using my Festool track saw to square up one edge of the cutting board, and I will use my table saw to square up the remaining edges in preparation for final sanding, everybody's favorite. I find that if I'm using a nice high quality piece of sandpaper, I really only need to go up to about 220. Every once in a while I'll step it up to 320, but for the most part 220 gets the job done. It took me quite a while to break down and buy these Festool quick clamps, but they work fantastic with the Pulp workbench. Here I'm just knocking down the sharp edges. I prefer to use an 1/8 inch roundover bit versus a chamfered edge. Just take your time going around the corners. You don't want to have any blowouts in the in-grain. I'm a really big fan of this foam 3M sanding pad. It does a really good job letting me get some of the router burn off the rounded corners, and then I'm just knocking off the sharp edge on the far corners as well. Just doing some final cleanup. I really wanted to add some nice finger grooves to these cutting boards, so I used my tabletop router. I set up a stop block and then measured over from the left side of the round nose bit. As you can see right here, I know exactly where to stop. It's a relatively simple process if you take your time and make sure you keep pressure up against that fence. That way you don't have any wobble or play in that bit, as it'll really show up on the edge of these cutting boards. Since each board was a different size and length, I had to adjust my stop block and final push point on each board. I was really happy with how well these turned out utilizing this cheap little router table. Now here's a pro tip for you. I see a lot of people skipping this step when they make their cutting boards. Right here I'm using some water in a spray bottle and I'm getting the surface wet, which is going to allow that wood grain to rise up. As soon as it dries, you can feel how rough it is with your hands. Now you're going to want to do this prior to using the cutting board. If you don't do this step the first time you use the cutting board, it will have a rough feel to it. Once the boards have fully dried, you guessed it, right back to the orbital sander with some high quality 220. Now the good news, this will be the finished sanding right here.
Let's sing a song full of hope, full of pain. Why don't you sing along, my friend? For it's our last refrain. Forever young, ever strong, ever brave. Memories like this never end. No, they don't fade away. So when I'm gone, oh, when I'm gone, I'll be right there, close to the sun. Keep holding on, keep holding on, and I'll be right there, close to the sun.
Well, there you have it, guys. That's going to end this video. I really hope you did enjoy the content. Maybe gave you some inspiration to get out in your workshop and make a cutting board out of some of those scrap pieces you have laying around. And as always, there's no mistakes in woodworking. I changed my design up on the fly, and I was really happy overall with what my finished product came out looking like. Anyhow, if you guys like what you saw, throw a comment down below. I love to read the comments and get back with you guys. We'll catch you on the next video.